I was digging through the depths of chess.com, guys, and found two incredibly interesting games played by Hans Niemann. Guess against who? Against Sindarov. The first game is somewhat reasonable. The second one is an absolute circus, full of blunders and everything else. By the way, Hans Niemann considers himself Fischer 2.0. Whether that's true or not is for you to judge. Game 1, the Italian breakdown. We start on the board with pawn to e4, pawn to e5, watching from Javokhir Sindarov's perspective. Sit back and get comfortable. We're looking at the beloved Italian game. Hans loves to twist not just beads, but spaghetti too. We transition into the two knights defense. Honestly, you could lunge forward with the knight to g5, the freed liver attack, but it doesn't offer many prospects, so Hans doesn't jump the gun. He plays it calm with pawn to d3, preparing pawn to c3, aiming to tuck the bishop on b3 and then to c2. Everything is strictly theory, everything is fine. Sindarov responds with a symmetrical development of his bishop. The king disappears into the mist, castles. Later in the game, a move like bishop to g5 or pawn to c3 is possible. Likely to prevent bishop to g5, Sindarov plays a prophylactic move, pawn to h6. We solidify, we develop. It's a fairly standard position that happens all the time, but in this game, guys, things are going to get heated. Hans Niemann is one of the few chess players who frequently plays the Italian game at a serious level. According to theory, of course, you need to solidify the pawn. Hans prepares the d4 pawn push and a retreat path for this bishop. Honestly, the best variation would have been to play knight to a5, attack the bishop, and if bishop to b3, just trade it off for the knight. But Sindarov plays a prophylactic move to prevent knight to a5. Now, if knight to a5 happens, the big bishop will just drop back to c2. Whoops! Sindarov wants to push the pawn further and grab space on the queen side. It would have been much better to play bishop to g4 to pin the knight and prevent the d4 push. Therefore, to prevent bishop to g4, Hans Niemann plays pawn to h3. By the way, not just bishop to g4, but knight to g4 was also a possibility to launch an attack. The bishop drops back to c2. Strangely, this bishop makes a ton of moves in this game. It's unclear why. He could have just offered a bishop trade on e3. He could have developed his knight. Apparently, Hans Niemann is playing his own brand of chess. Hey, smash that like button in advance and watch till the end. The second game is just pure juice. Hit like, I'm trying my best here. We're expecting an incredible slugfest, plus a bonus second game. Taking advantage of the weak light-squared bishop, black can already push pawn to d5. Pushing to d5 is a very strong move in this position. We blow the center wide open. Pawn takes d5, queen takes d5. Black simply has superior development, but the position is still equal. Finally, the bead started buzzing and he was forced to offer a bishop trade on e3. Yes, you can trade, but actually after the f-pawn takes on e3, the e4 pawn push follows and things won't look so great for black. Therefore, Sindarov makes the right call and retreats the bishop to f8. The second demon develops, bishop to f5. In a few moves, Niemann will show us exactly how to blunder pawns properly. Watch closely. Black locks on to the d3 pawn. Pushing the pawn to d4 isn't great because of e4, so Niemann decides to defend the d3 pawn with queen to b1, boxing his rook in on a1 and burying his queen on a terribly passive square. In positions like this, where white's pieces are entirely bottlenecked on the queen side, it makes sense to pivot to the king side and launch an attack. Apparently, that was the idea behind queen to d7, looking for an opportunity to sacrifice the bishop on the h-file, swing the queen over, and maybe follow up with knight to g4, resolving the e4 situation. Things like rook to e6, rook to g6. Sindarov probably saw all these ideas. But Niemann plays knight to e2 in this position, offering a knight trade, and after the trade, the pawn on e4 becomes an absolute concrete pillar. No way, says Sindarov. We'll trade later. The music didn't play long on c2. Time to get this bishop out to b3 so it actually does something, rather than just staring at the back of its own pawn and maybe perform a basic chess function. Let me take it. Go ahead. The rook swings to the third rank. This is Niemann's favorite trick, but right now this trick is playing against him. Let me show you. We push Niemann. We shove the beads in deeper. He retreats to a warm square. Bishop to h7. Sindarov is preparing an interesting f5 to f4 pawn push to dislodge the rook and then snatch the pawn on d3. Niemann is completely oblivious. Niemann plays on. You can capture on en passant on the a-file, and Sindarov just does that. Takes, snatches, snatches. Now the queen isn't defending the pawn on d3. And here comes the sneaky guy on f5. Retreating to g3 is bad because of a fork, so the knight has to retreat deep backwards where the beads grow. The knight on the d-file retreats. Now it turns out that after shoving the pawn to f4, the rook will be forced to retreat and the pawn on d3 falls. Of course, Sindarov plays exactly that. Drops back, snatches here. White tries to activate his queen somehow. Chopped on c2, maybe it was better not to trade. White could have tried something like rook to d8 to add more pressure here, but I'm sure Sindarov knows better than I do. They traded. What are we looking at positionally? White is down a pawn. Transitioning into an endgame is terrible for white. There's a chance to push the pawns to g5, h5, and g4, and somehow make white suffer, but Sindarov chooses a slightly different path. Queen to f7, solidifying, shielding his king from random checks from a2 or b3. Black is doing great. We push pawn to b4. We go on the attack. We want to kick this knight and snatch the pawn on e5. We defend the e5 pawn. Now the knight can retreat without consequences. Drops back here and defends the b7 pawn. The second horse joins the fray, looking for a brawl. He'll get his chance, but not today, buddy. Not your day. We solidify on e5. Of course, everything is defended by Sindarov. Everything is solid here. There are no threats. How long did the music play for this knight? Most likely, Niemann is preparing to push to d3 to pressure e5. But Sindarov surprises him with queen to b3. Well then, shall we dance, horsey? Knight to d3, snatched on c2. Niemann spots the pin on e8. He notices the rook is terribly placed. Chopped on f4. Obviously, you can't capture the knight because of queen to e8, but Sindarov finds other resources. Javokhir can just chop on b4 now, which he does. Queen to g6, Niemann tries to stir up an attack. The knight still can't be taken because of the pin on e8. Let's slide back to f8 so no one's threatened us. Wow, what a crafty American. The beads are buzzing. He just wants to deliver checkmate on g7, but that's not going to fly against Sindarov. He packs the g7 square with the rook. Niemann brings more pieces into the attack, but guys, this is already a blunder, an inaccuracy, a mistake playing to h2, knight to e6. It looks like he just blunders a knight in one move, but no. If you take this knight, write in the comments what happens. Oh, come on, it's simple. If he takes the knight, just queen to e4. Therefore, Niemann found a way to attack the queen and defend his rook at the same time. Knight to d2. The queen has to step back in a way that defends the knight on e6, and of course, Sindarov retreats to a2, cutting off the defense of the e6 square. The attacked queen has to retreat somewhere. He retreated. This might seem a bit weird to you guys, but Niemann managed to blunder a mate in 3 moves in this position. Actually, a mate in 2, just on making a move. He plays knight to e3, and after bishop takes on c, he resigned. He simply blunders a mate in 2. If the knight retreats, for example here, a mate in 2 follows. Here, here, and here. Game 2, the Sicilian Circus. Let's go watch the brilliant second game, guys. This is absolute juice. Sindarov is playing with the black pieces again, and again we face the move pawn to e4. But in this game, we answer with pawn to c5. Well, not us. Javokhir does. You'd think what could be worse than what happened in the previous game? Well, no. Niemann can still surprise us, and I'll prove it to you right now. By the way, hit subscribe because coming up we have an early playoff game featuring Nodirbek Abdusadarov, and at the end of the month the Candidates Tournament, where this very same Sindarov is participating. You're obligated to subscribe. We'll review the most interesting moments in the chess world together. The knight goes to f3. Here we enter the Paulson variation, guys. Pawn to d4, traded here and there. The knight moves. The pawn on e4 is attacked. You can defend with the knight and run into bishop to b4, so it's slightly better, more precise here to play bishop to d3 to avoid doubling pawns. We offer the knight for a trade. Snatched, snatched. I would have taken with the b pawn to prepare d5 later. Apparently, the Uzbekistan chess school has a slightly better feel for these positions. Castled, tucked away. Look at the absolute circus that's about to unfold. What is he going to do now? It's just shocking how he blunders like this bead fiddler. Pawn to e5, freeing up this bishop to g4, prophylaxis to stop him from going there. We develop to c5, queen to e2. Okay, fine. Then queen to e7, Niemann offers a trade, traded, queen to e3, castling, and instead of developing his knight, Niemann plays pawn to a4. What are you even doing? What kind of moves are these? Wait until we look at the accuracy at the end. You're going to lose your minds. We take control of the open file with black, knight here. It looks like white is totally fine in this position, and you cannot imagine what is going to happen in 4 or 5 moves. Knight to h5. The attack with the black pieces begins. Niemann ignores it. Rook to d1. Knight to f4. We're eyeing the g2 square, the h3 square, and the bishop on d3. Whatever, he doesn't care. He's cozy here. The first one goes. The bishop is supposedly defending the pawn on g2. The light-squared bishop develops, taking aim at the potential square for the knight on c4. Niemann plays knight to c4. Why?
queen to g5, just to deliver checkmate and smash this knight, but Niemann doesn't see it. One of the strongest grandmasters on the planet, who considers himself Bobby Fischer 2.0, makes a move like this and gets hit with bishop to c4. If you take this bishop, it's lights out.